He whispered, his voice dying like the last ember of a fire. "Ilara, flee to the isolated tower. It's our only chance. Yours and theirs." The icy wind whipped her cloak as the elderly widow, heartbroken and with 3 hungry grandchildren clutched to her, faced the sinister silhouette of the medieval tower, now her last and daunting refuge. Each step on the corroded stairs echoed the weight of her promise and the desperation of her flight. The heavy door creaked open, revealing a damp darkness and the scent of long-buried secrets. She swallowed hard, feeling the cold air bite at her wrinkled skin, but there was no turning back. What had her husband hidden there, and what she was about to discover would forever change the fate of her family and the legacy of her lost love. The darkness inside the tower was an impenetrable wall, denser than the night outside. The air, heavy and stagnant, carried the scent of cold stone, mold, and a forgotten past that seemed to suffocate the few rays of light that dared to penetrate through the cracks. Ilara clutched her 3 grandchildren close, feeling their small bodies tremble, not just from the cold, but from a silent fear she knew well. The eldest, a boy with large, frightened eyes, clung to her cloak, while the 2 younger girls, almost babies, whimpered softly, their little faces pale and their lips chapped from hunger. "Don't worry, my loves," Ilara whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and emotion, trying to instill a courage she barely felt. "Grandma will find a warm place for us and something to eat." She knew it was a difficult promise to keep in that labyrinth of shadows. Her wrinkled fingers fumbled along the rough wall, searching for a switch that didn't exist, a candle, anything that could ward off the blackness. The tower seemed to mock her fragility, each echo of her footsteps resounding like a warning. Ilara's heart weighed like a stone. Her husband's madness, his last enigmatic order, now seemed an even greater cruelty. To flee to that place with the children, with nothing but hope and blind faith, in the promise of a man who was no longer there to explain. A solitary tear traced a path down her time-worn face, but she wiped it away quickly. There was no time for weakness. Her grandchildren depended on her. With a deep sigh, Ilara took a hesitant step inside, pulling the little ones with her. Her eyes, accustomed to the gloom, began to distinguish vague shapes, piles of rubble, cobwebs hanging like ghostly veils, and the silhouette of a spiral staircase that disappeared into the darkness above. The cold was biting, and she could feel the dampness seeping into her bones. "First we need fire," she murmured to herself, more like a mantra than a statement. She spotted what appeared to be a fireplace, crumbled and covered in debris, but still a fireplace. There was a small hope there. She carefully placed her grandchildren on the floor, on a pile of dusty cloth she found, and knelt examining the spot. The fireplace was immense, but the flue was blocked by stones and soot. Her fingers trembled as she tried to clear the rubble, each movement a painful effort for her aged body. As she cleared it, her hands brushed against something solid and cold behind the loose stones. It wasn't a rock nor a piece of wood. It was something different, smooth and metallic in texture. A pang of curiosity, mixed with a sudden hope, ignited in her chest. Could this be it? What her husband had hidden, the promise of a truth? She took a deep breath, the icy air burning her lungs, and with renewed effort began to push the stones with more vigor, feeling adrenaline course through her veins. The grandchildren, watching her in silence, seemed to sense the change in their grandmother, the spark of determination that now shone in her tired eyes. Ilara knew she had to continue, for them, for her husband, for a chance at redemption. With wrinkled and aching hands, Ilara forced away the last stones blocking her path. A dull creak and the smell of damp earth filled the air. There, nestled in a small dark recess, it was, a dark wooden chest, adorned with rusted iron fittings and a sturdy padlock. Her heart leaped, a mix of dread and an almost unbearable hope. Could this be it? The truth her husband had promised? The grandchildren, previously quiet, now watched with wide eyes. The eldest boy pointing a trembling finger at the hidden object. The girls for an instant forgot their crying. Elara felt a lump in her throat. Was that chest the embodiment of her beloved's last madness, or the key to salvation? The weight of responsibility on her shoulders seemed to double, but her determination to protect her family burned stronger than ever. She needed to know, for them. With an effort that seemed to tear at her soul, Elara pulled the chest from its hiding place. It was heavy, surprisingly heavy, and she dragged it into the faint light that filtered through a crack in the tower's upper wall. Her eyes scanned the wooden surface, noticing carvings almost erased by time, symbols she couldn't decipher. The padlock, though rusted, seemed unbreakable. Elara tried to force it with her hands, with a stone, but nothing worked. A wave of despair threatened to engulf her. Had she come so close only to be thwarted? But then, her fingers fumbled upon a small indentation on the side of the chest, almost invisible beneath the crust of dirt and rust. With a soft click, a small lever moved, and the padlock, to her surprise, sprang open with a dry snap. The relief was so great that she felt her legs weaken, and a deep sigh escaped her parched lips. With trembling hands, Elara lifted the heavy lid. A golden glow erupted from the darkness of the chest, making her grandchildren's eyes widen in admiration. It wasn't just a few coins, it was a fortune. Piles of glittering gold, jewels that gleamed in shades of emerald and ruby. But beneath it all, carefully rolled and tied with faded ribbons, were ancient parchments. Elara's heart pounded. The gold was a miracle, but the parchments, they were the promise. A tear of pure disbelief and gratitude streamed down her wrinkled face. It was real, the hope her husband had promised. The weight of hunger and cold seemed to diminish, replaced by an overwhelming wave of hope. She pushed the gold aside, her eyes fixed on the parchments. There were many, with broken wax seals and calligraphies that danced in the gloom. With trembling hands, Elara picked up the top parchment. Its damaged seal bore a family crest, something she vaguely recognized from her husband's stories. Unfolding it delicately, her eyes scanned the first lines. The language was formal, ancient, but words like royal conspiracy, true lineage, king leaped out at her. The air seemed to thin in her lungs. This was unimaginable. Her grandchildren, oblivious to the weight of the words, watched the gleam of the gold, but Elara knew the true treasure was in her hands. The journey was just beginning, and the tower, once a tomb, now pulsed with the promise of an unimaginable future. Elara felt the air thin in her lungs. This was unimaginable. Her grandchildren, oblivious to the weight of the words, watched the gleam of the gold, but Elara knew the true treasure was in her hands. The journey was just beginning, and the tower, once a tomb, now pulsed with the promise of an unimaginable future. With a tremor running through her aged body, Elara held the parchment delicately. Her eyes, once tearful with despair, now burned with the light of understanding and an almost frightening hope. She needed more light and time, but the hunger and cold of her grandchildren were an undeniable urgency. With a sigh, she closed the chest, pushing it back into the fireplace recess, protecting the treasure. The gold and jewels could wait. The parchments, however, clamored for her attention. The eldest boy, innocent, touched his grandmother's cloak, his eyes fixed on the hiding place. "Grandma, what was that? It shone so brightly." Elara smiled, a faint but genuine smile, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "A secret, my love. A secret your grandfather left us, and it will change everything." She kissed her grandson's forehead, feeling the low fever that still afflicted him. The girls, nestled close, whimpered softly, and Elara's priority reaffirmed itself, to warm and feed her little ones. With renewed determination, Ilara rummaged through the fireplace rubble. Among stones and soot, she found dried twigs and a piece of cloth. With effort, and using sparks generated by rubbing two stones together, she lit a small flame. The faint warmth was an immediate balm. The grandchildren drew closer, extending their little hands to the fire, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. The tower, once a pit of darkness and cold, gained a point of life. As the flame crackled, Ilara picked up the most promising parchment. The flickering light of the fire was barely enough, but she strained her eyes, deciphering the words with fierce concentration. The text spoke of a noble lineage, of a king dethroned by a conspiracy of advisors, and how her husband's family, a direct descendant, had been forced into exile and anonymity to protect the true heir. Her husband, her beloved, was no simple man. He carried the blood of kings. A wave of shock and reverence washed over her. He had lived with this secret, protecting it until the end. The words revealed that her husband's lineage's lands and titles were not legends, but a usurped reality. The chest contained not only a fortune for survival, but irrefutable proof of the injustice. To her surprise, one of the smaller parchments, rolled separately, was a rudimentary map, precisely drawn, indicating a remote location and a legendary healing spring. The promise was not just of wealth and status, but of health and well-being, a miracle for the ailments that afflicted her body and the fragility of her grandchildren. Ilara felt an unknown strength well up within her. That man, her husband, whom she had thought had gone mad, had planned everything with wisdom and a love that transcended death. He had not abandoned her. He had guided her to the truth, to redemption. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and iron determination. She was no longer alone, at the mercy of fate. She had a purpose. She had a mission. Looking at her grandchildren who now slept peacefully by the fire, Ilara felt the weight of responsibility transform into a cloak of courage. The tower, once a refuge of despair, had become the cradle of a new era for her family. The gold would ensure bread, but the parchments would ensure the future. Justice, overcoming adversity, human connection, everything she valued was intrinsically linked to that treasure. Ilara knew the path would be long and dangerous, but the truth was a flame that once lit could not be extinguished. The journey to reclaim what was theirs was just beginning, and Ilara, with a renewed heart, felt that every step would be a tribute to her husband's eternal love and the promise of a worthy tomorrow for her grandchildren. The first light of dawn peeked through the tower's cracks, painting the stone floor with pale stripes. Ilara awoke with a start, her body aching from the cold floor, but her heart pulsing with an energy she hadn't felt in a long time. The fire, once a balm, was now reduced to dying embers, and the icy air began to bite again. Her grandchildren still slept, huddled together, their little faces serene in the innocence of sleep. Seeing their peace was her greatest reward and the greatest motivation for what was to come. Careful not to wake them, Ilara rose. Feeling her bones protest, her eyes sought the fireplace recess, where the chest rested safe. The gold and jewels were a promise of bread and warmth. But the parchments were the soul of her new existence. She took them out again, feeling the weight of history in her wrinkled hands. The faint light of dawn was insufficient, but she needed to reread, to absorb every word, every detail of the conspiracy that involved her family. The map of the legendary healing spring was what intrigued her most. Her fingers traced the faded lines, imagining crystal-clear streams and miraculous herbs. The eldest grandson's fever, the girl's fragility. Healing was as great a priority as justice, but how to get there? The tower was isolated. The nearest civilization, a small village, seemed a world of dangers and distrust for an elderly woman with 3 children and a royal secret. Ilara sat, the parchments on her lap, and watched the eldest boy stir, slowly opening his eyes. He looked at her, and a small smile appeared on his lips. "Good morning, Grandma," he whispered, his voice still sleepy. Ilara felt a warmth in her chest. "Good morning, my love. Did you sleep well?" The boy nodded, and his curious eyes turned to the parchments. "What are you reading?" Ilara hesitated. How to explain the complexity of a royal lineage and a conspiracy to a child his age? "Ancient stories, my dear, stories of our family, stories that show us who we truly are." She squeezed his little hand. "But now we need food and more warmth." The task of leaving the tower, even for a brief period, seemed monumental. Ilara couldn't leave her grandchildren alone, and taking them to the village with the gold was too risky. Distrust was an invisible obstacle, but as real as the tower's walls. She needed a plan that would ensure the safety of her little ones and the discretion of her treasure. With a sigh, Ilara decided. First, the basics. She would take a small portion of the gold, just enough to buy bread, milk, and firewood, and hide it in her cloak. She couldn't go to the village as Ilara, the hungry widow. She needed a story, a facade. She thought of her old life, the few times she had visited distant markets with her husband. She would remember how to behave, how to negotiate. The sun was already higher when Ilara prepared herself. She kissed the forehead of each grandchild, who were now awake, though still sleepy. "Grandma is going out for a little while, my loves. Stay here, by the fire. Don't open the door for anyone." The eldest boy, with a serious nod, promised to look after his sisters. As she opened the heavy tower door, Ilara felt the icy wind on her face. But this time, it wasn't just the cold that made her tremble. It was anticipation, the fear of the unknown, but also the unwavering certainty that every step, no matter how difficult, would bring her closer to fulfilling her husband's promise and securing a worthy future for her family. The journey, indeed, was just beginning, and the tower, once a refuge, was now the starting point for a new life. The biting morning air embraced Ilara, making her pull her cloak tighter around her body. The door creaked shut behind her, a sound that echoed in the solitude of the landscape. The trail, barely delineated, was stony and uneven, and each step was a challenge for her knees, already worn by time. Her eyes, accustomed to the tower's gloom, blinked under the pale light of the rising sun, which barely warmed the ground. In the secret pocket of her cloak, the small bag of gold coins weighed heavily, a constant reminder of the responsibility she carried. She could not fail. Not for her grandchildren, who trusted her blindly, nor for the memory of her beloved, who had given her this last and most important mission. At each turn of the trail, Ilara rehearsed the story she would tell. She would be a widow from an isolated farm, coming to the village to buy provisions for herself and her grandchildren, who were at home, sick with a mild fever. A simple, credible story that wouldn't raise questions about the tower or the chest. Her lips moved in silent murmurs, practicing the words, the tone of voice. The fear of being unmasked was a knot in her stomach, but the image of her grandchildren's hungry faces was a shield against any hesitation. After what seemed an eternity, the silhouette of the small village appeared on the horizon. Wooden houses and thatched roofs clustered around a central square where some activity was already visible. The smell of fireplace smoke and fresh bread wafted through the air, a tempting invitation that made Ilara's stomach rumble. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and forced a calm demeanor, though her heart beat like a drum. Upon entering the village, the curious glances of some villagers followed her. She avoided eye contact, keeping her head down like a humble and tired woman. She headed to the small general store, a rustic establishment with a wooden counter and shelves laden with grains, cheeses, and cured meats. The merchant, a corpulent man with a grizzled beard, watched her with suspicion as she approached. "Good morning, sir," Ilara said, her voice a little firmer than she expected. "I need bread, milk, some dried meat and firewood. My grandchildren are ill." She handed him one of the gold coins, carefully chosen not to seem excessive. The merchant's eyes widened at the gleam of the metal, but he quickly hid it in his palm, his eyes assessing her with new curiosity. "Where do you come from, madam? I don't recognize you," he asked, his voice hoarse. Ilara felt a chill, but maintained her composure. "From a farm beyond the hills, sir. My husband passed away, and now I care for the little ones. The road is long, but necessity brought us here." She gestured vaguely in the direction of the tower, but without pointing. The merchant seemed satisfied with the explanation, or perhaps the gleam of the gold had convinced him. He weighed the items, and Ilara felt immense relief as she saw the food being wrapped. The smell of fresh bread was intoxicating. She refused the offer of a porter, claiming she needed to be discreet. With a heavy bag in her arms and a bundle of firewood on her back, Ilara left the general store, feeling the weight of her accomplishment in every muscle. The way back to the tower was quicker, driven by the anxiety of reuniting with her grandchildren. The sun was already high, and the tower seemed less gloomy in the daylight. As she approached, she called out, her voice choked with emotion. "My loves, Grandma's back." The door opened, and the eldest boy appeared, his eyes shining with relief and joy. The girls right behind him ran to embrace her. Ilara hugged them close, feeling the warmth of their bodies and the unconditional love that propelled her. The bread, the milk, the firewood, they were more than simple provisions. They were proof that hope, however fragile, could be found even on the most difficult paths. The tower, once a refuge of despair, was now the home of a family that step by step began to rewrite its destiny, driven by a grandmother's courage and the promise of a future waiting to be unveiled. The warmth of the fire, rekindled with the brought firewood, danced in the fireplace, spreading a golden, cozy light that chased away the tower's most persistent shadows. Ilara watched her grandchildren devour the fresh bread and drink the milk with an eagerness that broke her heart, but also filled it with deep joy. The eldest boy, with crumbs at the corner of his mouth, smiled at her, and the girls, with rosier faces, nestled into each other, their crying forgotten. This was their sanctuary, yes, but a sanctuary that demanded courage and action. With the little ones fed and asleep again, Ilara pulled the chest closer to the fire, feeling the weight of the responsibility and history it held. The flickering light of the flame reflected on the jewels and coins, but her eyes were fixed on the parchments. She picked up the thickest one, unrolling it carefully, and began to read, straining her eyes to decipher the ancient calligraphy. The words danced before her eyes, but with each line, the truth became clearer, more frightening. The parchment detailed not only her husband's royal lineage, but the intricate web of lies and betrayals that led to the downfall of his ancestor. The conspiracy was not a distant event in time, but a shadow that still hung over the kingdom. The current king, a usurper, had consolidated his power through alliances forged in darkness and the systematic elimination of anyone who could question his legitimacy. Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. Her husband had not merely fled to protect the lineage, he had fled to hide the lineage. But what struck her with the force of lightning was the last part of the parchment. Written in a different, more hurried and urgent hand, it seemed to be a later edition, perhaps by Ilara's own husband. There was the turning point, the revelation that transformed hope into a dangerous mission. The text warned that mere possession of the parchments was not enough. The usurper, fearing the truth, had decreed that any claim to royal lineage without the presentation of a specific artifact, the scepter of truth, would be considered treason and punishable by death. The scepter, according to the parchment, was hidden in an ancestral crypt, deep within a distant mountain, guarded by riddles and traps. And there was a deadline. The scepter had to be presented at the next Grand Assembly of Lords, which would take place in less than 3 moons. If they failed to do so, her husband's lineage would be considered extinct, and the conspiracy sealed forever. Ilara felt the air thin in her lungs. Her hands trembled, and the parchment almost slipped from her fingers. It wasn't just a matter of inheritance. It was a race against time, a test of life or death for her grandchildren. The tower, once a refuge, now seemed too small for the magnitude of the task before her. She was not an adventurer, but an elderly grandmother. How could she, with her grandchildren, undertake such a dangerous journey? Her eyes turned to the sleeping faces near the fire. Her love for them was an unbreakable force. A fire more potent than any flame. She could not fail, not after all her husband had sacrificed. With a deep sigh, Ilara folded the parchment, feeling the weight of the decision in her heart. The journey to the legendary healing spring could wait. First, she needed the scepter of truth. The overcoming of her internal and external obstacles was just beginning, and Ilara knew that every step would be a tribute to her husband's eternal love and the promise of a worthy tomorrow for her grandchildren. Ilara felt the air thin in his lungs. His hands trembled, and the parchment almost slipped from his fingers. It wasn't just a matter of inheritance, it was a race against time, a test of life or death for his eldest granddaughter and his 2 boys. The tower, once a refuge, now seemed too small for the magnitude of the task before him. He was not an adventurer, but an elderly grandfather. How could he, with his granddaughter and his boys, undertake such a dangerous journey? His eyes turned to the sleeping faces near the fire. His love for them was an unbreakable force, a fire more potent than any flame. He could not fail, not after all his wife had sacrificed. With a deep sigh, Ilara folded the parchment, feeling the weight of the decision in his heart. The journey to the legendary healing spring could wait. First, he needed the scepter of truth. The overcoming of his internal and external obstacles was just beginning, and Ilara knew that every step would be a tribute to his wife's eternal love and the promise of a worthy tomorrow for his eldest granddaughter and his 2 boys. The silence of the tower, once a comfort, now seemed to amplify the echo of his own fears. Ilara closed his eyes, trying to calm his racing heart. The image of the ancestral crypt, guarded by riddles and traps, danced in his mind. A labyrinth of dangers for a man his age. His knees, already aching from the dampness and cold, seemed incapable of enduring such an arduous journey. And the boys, so small, so vulnerable. How to protect them amidst such an undertaking? He opened the parchment again, his wrinkled fingers tracing the lines of the rudimentary map that indicated the distant mountain. His wife's handwriting, though hurried, was unmistakable. She had foreseen everything, even the need for an artifact to validate the lineage. A wave of admiration and sadness washed over him. How had she carried such a heavy secret for so long, protecting it with her very life? He looked at his eldest granddaughter, who stirred in her sleep, a small moan escaping her lips. The fever, though controlled, still left her body fragile. The boys, nestled into each other, seemed even smaller in the vastness of the tower. That was his purpose, his compass. There was no room for hesitation. Justice for his wife, the future of his grandchildren, everything depended on his courage. Ilara knew he couldn't go alone. The nearest village, though small, offered a chance. He needed information, perhaps a reliable guide, someone who knew the mountain trails and could be discreet. But how to find such a person without revealing the secret of the chest and the true nature of his mission? Distrust was a wall as high as the towers, and popular wisdom said that royal secrets were too dangerous to be whispered. With a sigh, he stood, feeling the stiffness in his limbs. The first task would be to study the map more carefully, memorizing every detail, every landmark. He would need to estimate travel time, considering a child's slow pace and the need for frequent stops for rest and food. Then, he would need provisions that would last more than a few days, perhaps weeks. The gold in the chest was abundant, but it couldn't be displayed without attracting unwanted attention. He approached the chest, opening it just enough to take a few more coins, carefully hiding them in a new secret compartment he had sewn into his cloak. His eyes scanned the jewels, the cold gleam of the emeralds and rubies. They were beautiful, but the scepter of truth was the true treasure. What would guarantee his family's safety and future? Morning advanced, and the sun, now stronger, cast rays of light through the cracks, illuminating the dust dancing in the air. Ilaro sat again, the map spread on the stone floor. His fingers, though trembling, traced the imaginary routes, feeling the weight of responsibility. He was not a warrior, but his love for his family would transform him into one. The journey would be long, dangerous, and uncertain, but the promise of a worthy future for his granddaughter and his boys was the force that propelled him. He didn't know how, but he would find the scepter. He would bring justice. He would fulfill his beloved wife's last wish. The tower, once a refuge of despair, was now the stage for a new beginning, where the courage of an elderly grandfather would unearth hope in the darkest depths. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs and a new determination ignite in his heart, ready to face the unknown. Ilaro took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs and a new determination ignite in his heart, ready for the unknown. He was not a man of maps, but the urgency of the situation compelled him to decipher every line, every symbol drawn by his beloved wife's hand. The mountain, distant and imposing, seemed to mock his age, but the gleam in the sleeping eyes of his granddaughter and the boys was a beacon that dispelled any shadow of doubt. He couldn't take them on a dangerous journey, not yet. The ancestral crypt was no place for children. His little ones needed safety, a home, warmth, and the tower, for now, was the only sanctuary they could offer. The idea of leaving them again for a brief period tightened his chest. The memory of the last time, the anxiety of reuniting with them, was still fresh. But this time, the mission was greater, more crucial. He needed information, a guide, perhaps supplies that the small village didn't offer. The map, though detailed, was only a starting point. He needed knowledge about the trails, about the dangers of the mountains, about the best way to approach that crypt guarded by riddles. Ilaro stood, his bones creaking in protest, but his mind sharp. His eyes scanned the tower, searching for solutions. The gold, yes, was a blessing, but also a curse if misused. He couldn't simply arrive at the village and ask about the scepter of truth or ancestral crypts. Distrust was a poison that spread quickly. He needed to be subtle, an observer, a listener. Carefully, he approached his granddaughter, who coughed softly in her sleep. Her fever had subsided, but her fragility was still visible on her pale face. The boys, clinging to her, looked like angels. Ilaro caressed his granddaughter's hair, feeling its fine, soft texture. "I will return, my love," he whispered, his voice choked. "I will return with the truth and the hope your mother left us." He decided that his next visit to the village would be different, not just to buy provisions, but to research. He needed to find a place where people talked, where old stories were told, where perhaps an experienced traveler could be found. The tavern, Ilaro thought, was always a good place to listen. But how could an elderly man, alone, frequent a tavern without raising suspicion? He would have to disguise himself, perhaps, or find a plausible pretext. The idea of venturing into such a noisy and unfamiliar environment filled him with apprehension. His youthful days, when curiosity impelled him to explore, were long gone. Now every step was calculated, every interaction a risk. But love, that unconditional love for his family, was the fuel that moved him. He could not afford to fail. Hilaro took a piece of old cloth and began to sew a small bag, more discreet than the previous one, for the coins he would carry. He would need money to buy information, perhaps to pay for a drink for a storyteller. His fingers, though a little stiff, still had the dexterity from years of manual labor. As he sewed, his mind buzzed with scenarios and dialogues. He would remember the stories his wife told about markets and taverns, the gossip that circulated, the types of people found there. Daylight began to fade, and the tower's shadows lengthened, swallowing the last rays of sun. Hilaro knew he couldn't leave immediately. He needed to wait for morning to ensure the boys and his granddaughter were safe and well fed. He rekindled the fire, watching the flames dance, as if each spark were a small fragment of hope. The night would be long, filled with plans and fears, but also with unwavering faith. With the bag of coins hidden and the map etched in his mind, Hilaro sat by the fire, watching his grandchildren sleep. The scepter of truth was not just an artifact, it was the key to redemption, to the justice his wife had so sought. And he, Hilaro, would be the guardian of that key, the unlikely hero who would unearth the truth for his family. The path would be arduous, but the promise of a worthy future for his granddaughter and his boys was the force that propelled him, stronger than any fear. The next morning brought with it a cold clarity, but Hilaro felt an unusual warmth in his chest, a mix of apprehension and iron determination. He watched his granddaughter and the boys sleep, their faces serene under the faint light filtering through the cracks. The little one's fever seemed to have subsided a bit more, and the boys were stronger, but their fragility was a constant reminder of the urgency of his mission. Carefully, he prepared a simple porridge with the remaining milk and a little flour, ensuring they had something warm in their stomachs before leaving. He kissed each of their foreheads, whispering promises of a better future. "Grandma is taking care of everything, my loves. Grandpa will be back soon." He had swapped grandma for grandpa in his speech, a small detail to maintain consistency with the story he told in the village. The small bag of coins, meticulously sewn, was secure in his cloak. The map, now a vivid image in his mind, guided his steps even before he left the tower. The biting morning air enveloped him again, but this time Hilaro felt more prepared. The journey to the village was familiar, but the purpose was new, carrying a different weight. He wasn't just buying provisions. He was hunting whispers, seeking fragments of truth amidst the daily bustle. Upon entering the village, the activity was greater than on his last visit. Carts creaked, voices mingled in lively conversations, and the smell of smoke and food was more intense. Hilaro avoided the general store for now, walking directly to the center, where the sound of laughter and songs guided him to the Sleeping Dragon Tavern. The wooden facade, dark and old, seemed to intimidate him. His days of frequenting such places were long in the past, and the idea of mingling with strangers, of disguising his true intention, tightened his stomach. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and pushed open the heavy door. The interior was dark and smoky, lit by oil lamps and the glow of the fire in the hearth. The smell of beer, sweat, and stale food hung in the air. Several men, some rough, others older, sat at wooden tables, drinking and talking loudly. Hilaro chose a discreet corner near the fireplace and ordered a mug of warm cider, a pretext to stay and listen. His eyes scanned the room, noting each face, each gesture. He wasn't looking for a map or a parchment, but for a spark, a word that could ignite the flame of truth. A group of older men, with grizzled beards and tired eyes, spoke in low voices at a nearby table. Hilaro sharpened his ears, trying to catch fragments of their conversations. They spoke of harvests, of the weather, and then one of them mentioned something about The old mountain stories. Elaro's heart leapt. He tried to appear uninterested, sipping his cider, but every fiber of his being was attentive. The man continued with a melancholic tone. They say that there in the depths are ancient secrets, guarded by more than thorns and stones, things only fools or the desperate would seek. Elaro felt a chill, but also a pang of hope. It wasn't direct information, but it was a start. He realized that distrust and fear were barriers as great as the mountains. No one would speak openly about royal secrets in a place like that. He would need more than just listening. He would need to find a way to ask the right questions without asking questions. The task was more complex than he had imagined, but his love for his granddaughter and his boys was a shield against any hesitation. He finished his cider, feeling the warmth spread through his body, and stood up. Night was falling, and he needed to return to the tower, to his little ones. The journey for information was just beginning, and Elaro knew that every step, however subtle, would bring him closer to the truth his wife had hidden and the justice his grandchildren deserved. Elaro walked back to the tower under the starry cloak, the cold air kissing his wrinkled face. The conversation in the tavern had planted a seed of hope, but also the certainty that caution would be his greatest ally. His grandchildren depended on him, and his wife's secret was a burden too precious to be exposed. Upon reaching the tower, silence welcomed him, broken by the crackling of the fire. The sleeping faces of his granddaughter and the boys were the sweetest sight. The little one, with more regular breathing, seemed to have regained some color. He knelt beside her, caressing her hair with tenderness. "Everything will be all right, my angel," he whispered, the promise echoing in the tower. The next morning, Elaro dedicated himself to studying the map with a different eye. He wasn't just looking for the mountain, but for secondary paths, smaller villages, rivers, and forests that could offer a disguise. The main village was too busy, the eyes too curious. He needed a place where ancient stories were more than whispers, where the memory of the past lived in the stones and people. He remembered his wife's stories about the guardians of legends, elders who lived on the outskirts, knowing the secrets of the land. The idea ignited a new flame in his chest. With this new perspective, Elaro spent the following days in the tower, preparing himself. He sewed simple, dark clothes for himself to blend in. He set aside coins for a common traveler and hid the most valuable gold and jewels in a new hiding place beneath the fireplace stones. He couldn't risk taking everything. His granddaughter and the boys, though weak, were recovering well. His love for them was a balm for his soul. He taught them songs and stories, trying to maintain lightness while the weight of the mission grew. The day of his departure arrived. The sun had barely risen when Elaro bid farewell to his sleeping grandchildren. "Grandpa will be back soon, my dears," he murmured, a lump in his throat. This time he wouldn't go to the main village. The map indicated a small hamlet, almost a cluster of houses on the mountain slopes, a few hours' walk from the tower. A forgotten place, where history wasn't so filtered by distrust. The journey was silent, punctuated by the rustling of leaves beneath his feet. Elaro felt his age, but the image of his grandchildren propelled him. He arrived at the hamlet in the late afternoon. It was smaller than he had imagined, with a few stone houses and thatched roofs. There was a well in the center where an elderly woman, her face marked by time and her hair white, was drawing water. Elaro approached cautiously. He wouldn't ask direct questions. He introduced himself as a tired traveler, seeking shelter and warmth. The woman raised her eyes, observing him with gentle curiosity. Her blue eyes seemed to see beyond his clothes. "Good afternoon, madam," Elaro said, his voice a little hoarse. "I am a traveler, lost in thought. Is there a place where a weary man might rest and perhaps hear stories?" The woman smiled, lighting up her face. Stories, my dear. Oh, there's no shortage of stories here. Come, the house is humble, but the fire is lit and the soup is warm. Ilaro felt immense relief. It was a start. Human connection, rare on his journey, seemed to have manifested. He knew that the truth about the scepter wouldn't be easily revealed, but perhaps, in the quietude of the hamlet, the old legends might whisper their secrets. He followed her, feeling renewed hope. The night promised revelations. Ilaro followed Marta into the small stone house. The warmth of the fire and the aroma of fresh bread enveloped him. He sat, feeling the stiffness of his muscles yield. "Lentil soup and fresh bread, traveler," Marta said, serving him. Her blue eyes, clear in the firelight, fixed on him. "Made with care." Ilaro accepted the plate, grateful. "More than I could have hoped for, Madam Marta." He ate in silence, then gathered his courage. "I seek ancient legends, stories of the mountain," Marta smiled. "The mountain stories are the soul of this place, the deepest ones, guarded with zeal." She paused. "You are no common traveler, Ilaro. Your eyes carry the weight of a quest." Ilaro's heart pounded. She had noticed. "My wife left a legacy, a truth for my grandchildren." She spoke of a scepter, an ancestral crypt, and a guardian. Marta nodded. "The scepter of truth, an ancient legend. It rests in the crypt of whispers, guarded by a riddle. The guardian is the wisdom of the mountain. Only those with a pure heart and a just cause may approach." Ilaro felt both relief and terror. A riddle. How can an elderly grandfather decipher it, prove the purity of my heart? His voice choked, thinking of his grandchildren. He could not fail. Marta extended her hand. "The purity of the heart is proven by deeds, Ilaro. The riddle is not for the mind, but for the soul. The crypt of whispers reveals itself to those who understand the value of sacrifice and loyalty. There is an ancient song about the key. My mother taught it to me." She began to sing, her voice soft, a simple melody, a lament with enigmatic words. "A river without water, a mountain without a peak, and a love that never silences." Ilaro listened, feeling the words resonate, awakening memories. "This song," Marta explained, "is more than a melody. It is the first step of the riddle. The mountain tests your faith. Many have tried, but few understood that strength lies in the truth of the heart." Ilaro felt emotion. It was the climax. The song, the riddle, the test of faith. Everything he needed. He stood determined. "Marta, you have given me hope. I will not fail my family." Marta smiled. "Go with the mountain's blessing, Ilaro. Remember, the river without water is the impossible path. The mountain without a peak is the challenge that never ends, and the love that never silences. That is your guide. The crypt of whispers awaits. Find the river without water." Ilaro nodded, his heart full of courage. The melody echoed in his mind. A sonic map. The journey would be dangerous, but now he had direction and purpose. His grandchildren, wife, justice. Everything depended on him. He took a deep breath, ready. Ilaro took a deep breath, ready. Marta's melody, an ancient lament, echoed in his mind, clearer than any map. A river without water, a mountain without a peak, and a love that never silences. The words were a guide, a promise. He bid farewell to Marta with a grateful nod, his eyes moist with a hope he hadn't felt in a long time. The hamlet slept under the moon's silver light, and Ilaro, with his worn cloak and strongly beating heart, set off into the unknown. The night was cold, and the path steep. His knees protested with every step, but the image of his grandchildren, their sleeping and vulnerable faces, was a balm for the pain. He walked for hours, Marta's song repeating in a silent mantra. The mountain, once an insurmountable barrier, now seemed to call to him. He needed to find the river without water. At dawn, exhausted, Elaro spotted a crevice in the rock, a dry, stony riverbed that snaked upwards like a scar on the mountain's face. It was narrow, almost impassable, dotted with dry bushes and loose stones. "The river without water," he whispered, his voice hoarse. It wasn't a real river, but the impossible path Marta had described. With renewed determination, he began to climb, his wrinkled hands gripping the cold rocks, his feet slipping on the loose sand. Every movement was a challenge, but faith in his mission propelled him. The climb seemed endless. The sun beat down, and thirst tightened his throat. He stumbled, almost falling, but the memory of his wife's smile, the last time he saw her, made him rise again. A love that never silences, he thought, feeling her presence beside him. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the dry riverbed opened onto a rocky plateau, vast and flat, crowned by a peculiar rock formation that had no defined peak, but rose like a natural altar. "The mountain without a peak," he murmured, his heart racing. In the center of the plateau, hidden by a curtain of ivy and moss, was the entrance to the Crypt of Whispers. It wasn't imposing, but the aura of mystery was palpable. Elaro approached, the air growing colder and heavier. The entrance was dark, an inviting abyss. He hesitated for an instant, the fear of the unknown tightening his chest. But his love for his grandchildren was stronger than any fear. He entered the crypt, guided by a faint light coming from within. The interior was simple, the stone walls bare, but the air vibrated with an ancient energy. In the center, on a rustic stone pedestal, rested the scepter of truth. It was not grand, but elegant, made of dark metal with a clear crystal at its tip, which seemed to capture the scant light and radiate it. Elaro reached out, but an invisible barrier stopped him. Marta's voice echoed in his mind. "The riddle is not for the mind, but for the soul." The Crypt of Whispers reveals itself to those who understand the value of sacrifice and loyalty. He closed his eyes, and memories flooded him. The promise to his wife, the sacrifice of his own safety for his grandchildren, the arduous journey, the unwavering faith. He had not sought power or wealth for himself, but justice and a worthy future for his family. When he opened his eyes, the barrier had disappeared. He touched the scepter, feeling a current of warmth and peace flow through his body. The crystal at its tip glowed with a soft light, almost like a pulsing heart. In that instant, Elaro knew. He knew he had fulfilled his wife's will, that his grandchildren's lineage would be recognized, that justice would prevail. The scepter of truth was not just an artifact. It was the manifestation of his own unconditional love, proof that hope can be unearthed in the darkest depths. He held the scepter firmly, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the lightness of a burden that finally dissipated. The resolution was there in his hands, and his family's future finally secure. Elaro held the scepter firmly, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the lightness of a burden that finally dissipated. The resolution was there, in his hands, and his family's future finally secure. The crystal at the tip of the scepter pulsed with a soft light, almost a heart beating in sync with his own. He knew that the truth his wife had so sought now rested in his palm. With a last look into the crypt, a place that once represented the unknown and fear, but was now a sanctuary of hope, Elaro turned to the path back. The descent from the mountain without a peak and the journey through the river without water were less arduous than the climb. Not because the path had changed, but because Elaro's heart was lighter. Every step, once heavy with uncertainty, was now propelled by an unwavering certainty. The image of his grandchildren, their sleeping and vulnerable faces, was no longer a reminder of his fragility, but of the strength he had found to protect them. The sun was already setting when he spotted the tower, imposing and solitary, but which now seemed like a beacon of a new beginning. Upon entering, the tower's silence was broken by the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth and the regular breathing of his grandchildren. They slept deeply, nestled into each other, and his granddaughter, with a rosier complexion, seemed to have fully recovered her vitality. Elaro knelt beside her, the scepter still in his hands, and caressed her hair. A tired but genuine smile appeared on his wrinkled lips. "Grandpa's back, my loves," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion and relief. The next morning, the tower awoke with a new light. Elaro, with the scepter of truth on the rustic table, gathered his grandchildren. The boys, curious, approached the shining object, while his granddaughter, with her large, intelligent eyes, looked at her grandfather, sensing the importance of the moment. Elaro, with a calm voice, but full of new authority, began to tell the story. He spoke of his wife's courage, the truth she had hidden to protect them, and the journey he undertook to unravel the mystery. "This scepter," he said, pointing to the object, "is proof that you are not just ordinary children. You have a legacy, a lineage of kings and queens, and this tower, which seemed like a forgotten place, is in fact the cradle of a new fortune for our family." The boy's eyes widened, and his granddaughter, with a smile that lit up the entire room, hugged her grandfather. The words were simple, but the impact profound. Elaro explained about the lands and titles that belonged to them, about the justice that would finally be done, and about the legendary healing spring they would seek to bring even greater well-being. The tower, once a symbol of abandonment and mystery, transformed into the cradle of a new fortune and the stage for his family's redemption. Elaro, the elderly widower who had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, now saw hope flourish. Love and loyalty, unwavering faith in his wife and his family, had unearthed the truth from the darkest depths. He looked at his grandchildren, their faces full of admiration and joy, and knew that every step, every sacrifice had been worth it. The future, once uncertain, now opened up, bright and full of promises, a testament to the power of a love that never silences. The future, once uncertain, now opened up, bright and full of promises, a testament to the power of a love that never silences. Elaro, with the scepter of truth still vibrating in his hands, felt the weight of responsibility, but also a lightness in his heart, knowing that the journey had not ended, but that the path ahead was illuminated. That same afternoon, he unrolled the ancient parchments on the tower's rustic table, his wrinkled fingers tracing the lines of a forgotten story, now revealed. There, detailed in elegant calligraphy, was irrefutable proof of his wife's royal lineage and consequently of his grandchildren. There were names, dates, and seals that attested to the legitimacy of their claims, a legacy awaiting to be reclaimed. With a heart full of renewed courage, Elaro decided he would waste no time. Justice for his family could not wait any longer. The next day he set off again, not for the village, but for the nearest city, a center of power and bureaucracy where the kingdom's laws were rigorously applied. He took the scepter with him, wrapped in a simple cloth, and the parchments carefully kept close to his chest. His granddaughter and the boys, now stronger and full of vibrant curiosity, waved from the tower, their childlike faces illuminated by the promise of a better tomorrow, a worthy future. The journey to the city was long and tiring, but Elaro's determination was unwavering. Upon presenting himself to the local authorities, a group of austere and visibly suspicious men, he faced initial skepticism. His simple clothes and advanced age inspired no confidence whatsoever, but when he revealed the scepter of truth and the parchments, the air in the room changed drastically. The official's eyes widened in surprise, and the heavy silence gave way to whispers of awe. The truth there materialized was undeniable to all. After days of interrogations and meticulous verifications, the lineage of Ilaro's grandchildren was officially recognized. The lands and titles, once lost in the mists of time, were restored with full honor. Justice, long awaited, finally prevailed. With the paperwork in order and a new sense of dignity, Ilaro returned to the tower. His grandchildren awaited him with palpable anxiety, and the news of their new status was met with a mix of astonishment and contagious, childlike joy. But the greatest promise was yet to come: the legendary Healing Spring. Ilaro, with the map in hand, guided them through dense forests and flowery valleys, a journey that, this time, was permeated by laughter and joyful songs. His granddaughter, now full of energy, ran ahead with the boys, her steps light and full of life, exploring every new nook. Finally, they found it. Hidden in a secret clearing, the spring bubbled with crystal-clear waters, exuding a soft glow and a sweet, inviting fragrance. The grandchildren, without hesitation, plunged their hands into the water, feeling an immediate wave of well-being. His granddaughter, who had previously languished, felt her body's vitality completely renewed, as if she had never been ill. The boys, with rosier skin and shining eyes, seemed to have absorbed the very essence of life. Ilaro watched them, his heart overflowing with gratitude and love. He also drank from the water, feeling a deep peace and a vigor he hadn't experienced in his tired body for a long time. The tower, once a decrepit refuge, transformed into a vibrant and welcoming home. The surrounding lands, now under the family's guardianship, flourished with new life. Ilaro, with the scepter of truth in his new study, dedicated himself to educating his grandchildren, teaching them about their history, about the importance of justice and altruism towards others. He watched them grow, strong and wise, honoring the legacy of their mother and grandmother with every action. His granddaughter in particular showed remarkable intelligence, eagerly absorbing every teaching, promising to be a just and compassionate leader for her people. In his final years, Ilaro sat by the fireplace, watching his grandchildren play happily. The weight of the world had dissipated, replaced by a lightness of spirit and a profound sense of accomplishment. The memory of his wife was no longer a searing pain, but a comforting presence, a constant reminder of the love that united them and had guided his every step. He had fulfilled his promise, unearthed hope, and built a glorious future for his family. The tower, the scepter, the healing spring, all were a testament to the unbreakable power of love, loyalty, and faith, proving that even in the darkest depths, the light of hope always finds a way to shine brightly.